Hello, welcome to this presentation. This presentation is part of the Malawi Institute of Engineers webinar series, and this was done yesterday, and by yesterday I mean it was the 23rd of November. So today is the 24th of November 2020. Now, because the webinar actually had a few technical glitches, we felt it would be good if we record the presentation again without any interruption, so you can refer back to it and the presentation itself with me actually presenting. The presentation for this webinar series is defending the Mjigo, and also really answering the question of should we abandon the hand pump for a better technology. So just to introduce myself, my name is Muthi, and I'm team leader for a local NGO called BASEflow, which is working to improve the sustainability of groundwater sources. So moving into the presentation, this is me. As mentioned, I'm team leader with BASEflow, and my roles are mostly around strategic leadership, partnership building, and resource mobilization. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, which is very strange to some people because some people think I'm a social scientist. I'm not, I'm actually a civil engineer. And also I have an MBA. I have 17 years experience in local and international development, NGO management, leadership, social innovation, but most of that has been in the water sector, and specifically looking at designing and implementing WASH, or water and sanitation and hygiene evaluations, not just in Malawi, but in other countries like Rwanda and Uganda. So before I jump into my presentation, the reason why I wanted to do this presentation after discussion with Washington, who is the regional chapter chairperson for the Central Region for MIE, was because at the time there was the vice presidential public lecture, which was looking at mindset change. And during the question and answer session, His Majesty Chief Mbelwa made a comment and a question. And the comment, which I completely agree with His Excellency, is that water is a significant asset. Access to water is the most important issue of our time as a country. And I would totally agree with him. Water and people's ability to access it is fundamental and foundational to civilization building. In fact, I like to often tell people that water is a threshold resource, meaning that any city, any country, any civilization would collapse without water. In fact, some people are suggesting that the next world war will most likely be around water. So on that point, I agree with His Majesty, because as a country, water is strategic to all our key sectors. You look at agriculture, we need water. And though I'm not a politician, I personally think the government should take the money they're putting in the fertilizer subsidy program and put it in investing in irrigation systems. But I'm not a politician. If you look at health sector, the recent pandemic was an issue of water. You needed water to wash your hands. You needed water to make bleach. You needed water to manufacture hand sanitizers. Water, again, was fundamental to health. And even energy. 95 to 97% of Malawi's energy supply is hydropower. Once again, water. So water is important, and on that, I agree with His Majesty. Where I respectfully disagree is on the point that we need to move away from the hand pump, or the Mjigo, as most people call it. In fact, in most parts of Malawi, it's called the Danida, because the Danish International Development Agency brought it to the north. So it was named after them. So His Majesty's point that we need to move away from the hand pump to something more modern is one I would like to interrogate during this presentation. And there have been others that have criticized the hand pump. There was Honorable Juliana Lunguzi a few years ago who also brought it up. And it keeps coming up again and again. We need to abandon the hand pump. We need to abandon the hand pump. So my presentation is looking at possibly defending the hand pump. So before I go into my defense of the hand pump, I just want to firstly talk about Malawi's water CV. What does the water situation look like for Malawi? First off, many people don't know this. Malawi was one of the few countries to achieve the MDG, the Millennium Development Goal target for 2015, specifically for water, where we were required to cut in half the number of people without water supply. In the mid-90s, the water coverage, that is the number of people, the proportion of the population that has water, was a little under 50%. And so it was a very dire situation. There were cholera cases, diarrheal cases. It was a very dire situation. And the Malawi government took this problem by the horns and they tried to solve it by a massive infrastructure development program that looked at shifting Malawi's situation to the positive from the negative. And we actually achieved that. By 2015, our water coverage rate was about 89%. We were the second highest water coverage rate in the SADC region, according to the BBC in 2017. And we were second only to Botswana, that had 95%. So clearly our infrastructure development initiative of the government and also implementing partners was a success. We were able to achieve our goal of halving the number of people without water. And one of the major reasons of this success, one of the major contributing factors to this success was the government's achievement, actually a very important one, of standardizing the amount, standardizing the technologies that Malawi uses. This is something that is something that some countries still struggle with, trying to make sure we use the same few technologies rather than several different technologies. And the technology that we were able to successfully standardize was the Afridev hand pump, or otherwise called the Mjigo or the Afridev. Most people know it as the Mjigo or the Danida, as I mentioned in the north. So just a few technical aspects of the Afridev hand pump. Firstly, it has a lifespan or productive life cycle of 50 years. But actually, I have come across hand pumps that the Afridev hand pump that has gone up to 25 years. There's a hand pump in Nchewu, which was drilled in 1995 and has been discharging water and providing water to the community there for 25 years. So though its useful life is 15, it can actually go for much longer. Its design yield is 0.25 liters per second. That's its design yield. Anything lower than that is not recommended, but also it can service 250 people. So one other thing about this technology, which is not technical, but I would say inspirational, is that the Afridev hand pump is a Malawian-inspired design. Some engineers in the Ministry of Water at that time wanted to design a hand pump that could be cheap to maintain, cheap to repair, and you could easily get spare parts within the country. So the engineers within the ministry came up with the initial prototype of what was called the Malawi Development Hand Pump, or MALDEV, and this was later on taken on by others with support of World Bank and ODA, and they developed the Afridev hand pump that we know now. So this hand pump is actually a Malawian design. And since we are in the age of Buy Malawian, we should celebrate this success and not throw it out. In fact, this particular technology, unfortunately, we don't own it. The patent was actually taken and is now being manufactured in India. Imagine if we got the patent and we were producing this for ourselves. So this is a Malawian design. So Buy Malawian, buy Afridev. Now, some of the criticism of the Afridev hand pump, as I mentioned, His Majesty, as well as Honorable Juliana Luguzi, and many others, the criticism has always been of this nature. The Afridev hand pump is an old and archaic technology. We need to move away from it and upgrade to better technologies. This is the 21st century. We need something more modern. These are some of the reasons people give for why we need to ditch the Mjigo or the hand pump for better technologies. But in all fairness, these sentiments are more to do with change for the sake of change and not based on actual data or evidence of its performance in the field, which is what I'll show you today. Now, a lot of people who are advocating for this technology to be discontinued actually advocate that we should go for more advanced technologies. more to do with solar-powered reticulated systems. Now, for some of you who don't know what reticulated systems are, it's basically pipe. Reticulation is just a fancy word for pipe network. So the water is pumped from the ground into a tank and reticulated or distributed through a pipe network. And in this case, it would be a solar-powered submersible pump pumping into a tank. Now, everyone has fallen in love with this particular technology. But the question is, will it actually work? Is it something we should actually be advocating and ditching the Afridev hand pump? So solar-powered reticulated systems have become what I like to call the magic bullet, the solution to solve Malawi's water problems. But actually, we've been here before. We have had other magic bullets in the past. This is not the first time. And the one magic bullet I want to talk to you about is the play pump. This was a very popular technology in the early 2000s. A number of NGOs were pushing this and a number of donors were pushing this, saying that this technology will help address the water supply problems, specifically in schools. You can see from this image the children playing on the play pump. As you can see, it's a roundabout pump, like a merry-go-round. And this obviously was a huge selling point for this technology. The kids smiling, and so it could provide water as well as a plaything for the children. So how was this technology designed? Basically, very simple. Children play on the roundabout pump and it pumps into a tank and reticulates to a tap. Again, a reticulation system, just like what we're saying with the solar-powered system. Now, this technology was hugely popular. It was designed by a borehole driller in South Africa, so it was massively popular. In fact, it got an award from the World Bank. The designers of this technology, the promoters of this technology, were able to raise about $13 million to actually get this technology and spread it across Africa. So it was a massively popular technology, and everyone was touted it. In fact, it became very popular after Nelson Mandela actually launched it at a school a few years ago, a few years before he died. So it became massively popular. But what has happened to this technology, obviously, you may ask? Actually, this technology, despite its popularity, despite the investment, World Bank backing, financing, actually, this image summarizes what has happened to this technology. This image is an image I took about 4, 5, 6 years ago now. I can't remember, but it's several years ago. But this is in the district of Chikwawa. And I spoke to the district water officer the day before this recording, and these play pumps are still there. They are unused and sitting there, and we are still trying to figure out what we do with them. The district is still trying to figure out what we do with them. This is what happened to the play pump. In fact, we call this the play pump graveyard in Chikwawa. And those of you who are going to Majete or to other sites, you can go and see the Afridev or the play pump graveyard. Now, why did this technology fail? It was too expensive to install and very complex to maintain, especially for the rural populations who were supposed to take it on and maintain it. But also it was reliant on child labor. But there was an additional problem in Malawi, which was that of safety. Children were spinning on the merry-go-round or being thrown off and getting injured, head injuries, and all manner of injuries. So there was a health and safety problem as well. But there was also a technical sustainability issue. According to the Guardian newspaper of 2009, they actually said it would take about 27 hours of spinning that roundabout pump, the merry-go-round, to just generate water enough for the 2,500 people it was designed to supply for. So you can see, even technically, it was not sustainable. Now, what happened? In one of the few times the Malawi government has done something like this, the Malawi government not only banned and removed this particular technology, it was also replaced by, you guessed it, the Afridev hand pump. The hand pump we want to get rid of. And they replaced it with this hand pump because it was easier to maintain. Spare parts are available and it's easy to operate. The communities understand how this system works. But despite this, we are now promoting a new magic bullet. Systems like this one, solar powered, into tanks and reticulated. But is this the magic bullet? Is this going to solve Malawi's water problems? I'll go into another part of my presentation where I'm going to share some work that we've done with the University of Strathclyde with support from the Scottish Government and in very close collaboration with the Malawi government through the Ministry of Agriculture at that time, but now the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources. As part of the work we've done in partnerships with the stakeholders I've mentioned, we and many others here like United Purpose, World Vision, Water for People, CADCOM, conducted a water point mapping exercise where we were looking at mapping every single water point across the country. So we have a sense of what is the situation in terms of the systems we have out there. Now this, what you're seeing now is just an explanation of the areas in which the things we're looking at. So we're looking at availability, reliability, access, environment, and management. So we're looking at those dimensions. But the key figure I want to show you is the one down here where it says water points and the number below. And that figure is the number of water points that we were able to find. 1,201, close to 122,000 water points that were found. But this combines both improved and unimproved, but the majority obviously were improved, a little over 100,000. So there were quite a substantial number of water points that we found. And from this data, we were able to isolate the performance of different water technologies. Now, I'm going to show you the performance of the Afridev hand pump, but I'm going to compare it to a proxy technology of the gravity-fed system, because the gravity-fed system is like the solar-powered reticulation system in that there are pipes and that go to taps that people can access their water. The difference is with the gravity-fed system, the water comes from an intake in a mountain or a hill, and it's just gravity that takes the water to the communities. While with a solar-powered system, you have a submersible pump connected to a solar panel. That is the only difference, but it's still a reticulated system, a pipe system providing water. So we're going to compare the performance, the functionality performance of the Afridev and a gravity-fed system. So what was the performance of the Afridev? Hand pump fitted boreholes, we found close to 52,000. And the functionality of this technology was at about 86%. So how does this compare with the global averages? Normally, the global average for non-functionality of water points across Africa is normally between 25 and 30%. Others argue it's now shifted between 20 and 25%, but let's go with 25 to 30%. Either way, it doesn't matter. So if the non-functionality is 25%, as an example, that is the global average for Africa, this technology has a non-functionality rate of about 14%. So it outperforms most technologies on a global scale. But the figure of 86%, this is an important point, is a combination of two things. The blue region, which is functional without problems, and the yellow region, which is functional, but it's got some problems, but it's discharging water. So if you combine those, it comes up to about 85.9 or 86%. Now, how did the gravity-fed schemes do, or pipe systems into public taps? What we found in the rural areas of Malawi was that we found about 28,000 of these systems. That is the taps in rural parts of Malawi, and these are public taps, just to add. We found that 68% of these were functional, meaning it had a non-functionality rate of 32%, which again is in line with the African average. So you can see here that the performance of the Afridev hand pump as compared to the pipe system is so much better, almost 20% difference. So the Afridev is outperforming the pipe systems that are there. In fact, I think the engineers who designed the initial prototype of the Afridev can be proud of themselves because the ease of maintenance is showing even in the data. But I want to ask a question. This particular, the Afridev hand pump, or rather the gravity-fed scheme, the pipe systems into public taps, if they are functioning at 68%, and this is just gravity, no pumping or anything, what more if we add the complex system of a solar-powered submersible pump? In addition to that, will communities manage it? Will communities maintain it? Mind you, Malawi's sustainability plan is that rural communities must manage these systems. So can rural communities manage these systems And of course, some of these rural communities form institutions like water user associations, but they're still rural communities that form the bulk of the people in those institutions. If they have this kind of non-functionality rate of 32% almost, what more if we add the complexity of a solar-powered system? Will it not drop? Will they be able to maintain those systems? So this is a question for reflection. So at this point in my presentation, many of you are obviously thinking, Muthi, are you saying that the Malawi government should simply drill boreholes and that should be our strategy because the technology is easy? Why not the convenience of a tap at someone's house? In fact, for those of you who don't know, the Sustainable Development Goals actually are asking us, challenging us that we need to provide improved supply or safely managed supply, which is essentially water at someone's house, which can be achieved through reticulated systems, which we have shown we're not actually managing or maintaining properly. So the question I'll ask again, should we invest in hand pumps, or should we, which are relatively performing better, or should we invest in pipe systems, which I've shown you are not performing better? The answer to that question is, it depends. Different technologies work in different contexts. There are some hand pumps that don't work well in different areas. There's several things to consider. For example, there are places like in Gabu, in Chikwawa, where you are likely to hit salty aquifers, meaning the groundwater you'll find is extremely salty. But yet you have examples of, for example, DFID a few years ago, investing in international NGOs to do drilling programs in places like in Gabu, yet we know the water there is salty. That was a bad decision. So the hand pump may be fixable, but there are other things we need to consider around it. In the same way, pipe systems are workable in certain contexts. So you need to look at financial considerations, technical considerations, and even social considerations, particularly in terms of the management aspect, if you want communities to manage these systems. So the answer is, it depends. So some of you are asking, so are you defending the hand pump then? No, I'm not. I'm not here. I've actually kind of tricked you. I'm not here to defend the hand pump. The hand pump performs as it does perform. The data I've shared with you is accurate. It's field data. But the real question or the issue, and this again, I go back to what I said about His Majesty, the question of whether we should graduate from the Afridev to a different technology, whatever that technology is not the real question. We are having the wrong discussion. There's another discussion we need to have. And to begin that discussion, I want to go back to Malawi's water CV. This water CV I shared with you was very colorful. I'm going to remove the makeup, and we're going to see the reality of Malawi's water situation. My estimate, and this is an estimate, I have not done the analysis, but with figures like in 2017, 800 boreholes were drilled by about 34 NGOs, 800 boreholes. So my estimate is that between 2017 and now, Malawi should have already achieved 100% water coverage. It is an estimate. It could be 95, maybe between 95 and 100, but my estimation is that it is over 100%. And again, this is a projection. The non-functionality of all the systems based on the mapping we've done so far, or of the 100, close to 101 water points that we found, is hovering between 20 and 25%. Now, with that non-functionality, those systems that are there physically, but not working, what is the materiality in terms of monetary value? My estimate, again, this will need to be validated, is that we have wasted about between 22 million and 66 million United States dollars. These are systems we've installed, improved systems, that's boreholes, hand pumps, or taps, or any other system that we've installed that are not working. About anywhere between 22 and 66 million United States dollars have been wasted. That is the issue we should be talking about. This wastage, this non-functionality of these water systems. And so the question is not about the technology, no. The question we should be asking about is how do we sustain the technology that is there? And to answer this question, there are certain considerations we need to think about as a country, as engineers, as water practitioners, as parliamentarians, as hopefully the president or vice president, if they're listening. The issues, the factors we need to consider in terms of sustaining the systems we have out there so we reduce this non-functionality and this waste. There are 5 factors we need to think about as a country. And I'll start with this one. As I mentioned, this is the data I shared with you earlier, but I've changed it a little bit. What I shared with you earlier was a little dishonest because the functionality of the hand pump that I presented was at about 86%, roughly. But actually, if we remove the water points or the hand pumps that are functional but have problems, and we only focus on the ones that are functioning without problems, the picture is a little different. Likewise, with the gravity-fed schemes or the pipe systems with public taps, they go below 50%. So if we were to factor in this kind of thinking where we only look at systems that are working but don't have problems, the coverage rate that I showed you earlier is very different. It's probably less than 70 or even closer to 60% coverage, not the over 100% that I said, if we factor in this kind of thinking. So this is something that we need to really think about. I said earlier that these systems are managed by communities. These are rural people, and most of them manage these systems on a voluntary basis. They are not paid for their time. And the training that goes into them, especially for hand pumps, water use associations, is relatively better. What we are finding is that these people are trained 2-3 days, when actually the government standard, I believe, is 7 days of training. But the NGOs that are implementing this work and other social investors are doing it in compressed amounts of time. And this is technical information, financial information, operational information that most engineers have taken months to understand, let alone master. And we are training these rural communities in short amount of time to do work that they're not being paid for. But there's another philosophical question I want to pose to you. In urban areas, we don't have to worry about fixing our taps or our pipe systems. If a pipe bursts and there's no water, you simply call a water board. You don't have to fix it. But for some reason, we expect rural people to fix these systems. Is that fair? Because rural people already have so much burden. They have to think about food, they have to think about school, and other NGOs are putting all this other added pressure on them. Should we add on top of that the added burden of managing these systems, which, by the way, we're not paying them for? Is that really fair? In addition to this is the issue of poverty. If you want a system to be maintained, you need to charge the right tariff. That is the amount of money people pay towards operation and maintenance. This is an important issue. And to illustrate my point, I want to just share a quick story. There was a local utility operator in Chikwawa, or what we like to call in short, a LUO, local utility operator. So this is a private person who is managing a piped network system. And this person, I was having a chat with him several years ago. And I asked him, are you charging a full cost recovery tariff? Are you getting your money back, or are you at least breaking even? And his answer was no, because the government, or the district council in this case, had decided that he should charge a certain tariff for each village, which was a flat rate that was below full cost recovery. Meaning the amount of money that was coming in from the community was not sufficient to cover for the costs of operating, let alone maintaining the system. So there was no incentive for this person to continue maintaining the system. And he quit. He stopped managing the system. I don't know who is there now. So this is an issue we need to think about, because if whatever system we bring in, whether it's hand pumps or pipe systems, solar powered, whichever, there's a cost to maintaining it. Can the communities do that? A lot of the tariff setting that exists is based on what the community can afford. It's guesswork. It is not based on a structured tariff. So this is something we need to think about. So you can come in with your solar powered systems, but if we don't think through very clearly about the tariff and whether communities should maintain these systems, instead of maybe having something like maybe the regional water boards taking over all of the regional, or all of the pipe systems, and that they manage them maybe through a delegated private operator. If we don't have this discussion, these systems will keep failing. This is the first factor, maintenance and tariff. The second factor is about investment transparency. I work in the NGO sector, so I'll give a specific example for NGOs, but I know there are different examples about transparency in the construction industry, because I know there's the construction sector transparency initiative that is tracking those things, but I'll only share for the NGO sector for my presentation. One of my good friends, Lazarus Piri, who is now working with African Development Bank, then of course he was with the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Water Development. He was responsible for coming up with a document, which was the Rural Water Supply Investment Plan. Basically, what this document was, it was to tell us how much water is out there, how many systems are broken, and what will it cost to get water to everyone across the country. So this is money for maintaining the systems, money for putting in new systems, and so on and so forth. And in that document, the figure that Lazarus came up with was about 75 billion Malawi kwacha. That's how much money we need to actually reach everyone with water between 2014 and 2020. So there's a document that exists that has those breakdowns in there. Now, there's another document called the CSO Performance Report. This is a document that is captures the amount of financing that is coming in through NGOs. And this is managed by an organization called WestNet, which is Water and Environmental Sanitation Network. Now, this particular document for the 2017 report actually showed that just the water component, because they capture for sanitation and health and hygiene as well, but just for the water component, in just 1 year, Malawi received 27 billion Malawi kwacha in terms of investment towards water. So that is borehole rehabilitation, hand pump rehabilitation, systems installations, things around that, but specifically for water. So basically 1/3 of the money Malawi needed to reach everyone with water came in 1 year. 1/3 of the total amount of money we needed came in 1 year from NGOs. But this is not the full story. The full story is that the 27 billion only represents 43% response rate. In terms of actual numbers, that is 34 NGOs out of 80 NGOs provided their statistics. 34 out of 80. So that is 43% response rate. So if 34 NGOs brought in 27 billion, what about 80? Could it be more? We don't know, because these NGOs are not sharing this information. So basically they could be drilling or installing systems in places where they're not supposed to be installed. But we don't know, because these NGOs, these 57% non-response NGOs are not telling us, and they don't want to. I attended a meeting with a senior director in the Ministry of Water, who I'll not mention. And in this meeting, there were several international NGOs, and I was with an international NGO at that time. And it was about the flooding that happened. This was don't take my word, I think it was 2015 or 2017. You can correct me. In this meeting, it was basically to understand what money are the international NGOs bringing in, and what money is the government bringing in to see against the need in terms of non-food items and wash or water infrastructure support. The NGOs in that room, my NGO, and I was representing the international NGO I was with, we said we will share our information today. The other international NGOs were not as responsive. Many of them said we have to consult our headquarters in Europe. We have a complicated finance system. You can't understand it. And the government official had no powers to demand that that information be shared. So when I say that NGOs don't want to share this information, I am not just saying this. There are examples upon examples of NGOs not being transparent. The NGO board, and this is official statistics, estimates that there could be 780 NGOs in Malawi, but only 150 of them provide actual returns of what they're doing and how much money they're bringing in. So NGOs are not transparent, but the impact of this is we're not coordinating efforts with government and other people in private sector, for example, so that we can see who's bringing in what and how can we coordinate the resources so that maybe NGOs are going to areas where hand pumps or installed pipe systems are not needed. They can go to where it is actually needed. This is the problem of this second factor of investment transparency, particularly from NGOs. The third factor is on water availability, or the water resource in Malawi. There are a lot of assumptions about the water resources here in Malawi, and I'll share a few graphs for you to appreciate. The graph that you are seeing is water availability by technology across the year. So this is showing water availability from January to December, but also I've broken that down by technology. Now, what this means is it's showing you the number of water systems that are not working because of seasonality, okay? Meaning there was no water in that system because of seasonal changes, heat, climate change, things like that. So what you're seeing is that over here in October, as expected, a lot of systems did not have water because they dried up. And what is number one throughout the year almost? Pipe systems. Again, if you're bringing in solar-powered systems, you need to know this. Pipe systems are not performing, especially when it comes to seasonality. Hand pumps are also having challenges. Don't get me wrong, they're having challenges, but it is not as bad as in terms of the proportionality to hand pumps. Of course, we can look at the proportionality against the technology itself. I haven't done that analysis, so you can do the analysis. But in terms of actual numbers, you can see pipe systems are not doing very well. And this is because of the availability of water throughout the year. And this is, we were just asking, is there a time of the year where the system does not have water? That's all we asked. We didn't ask about climate change. This is not even before we even talk about climate change. Another issue about water resources is something we call the renewable water versus population. Renewable water is basically the water we get through rainfall, water that comes through rivers, and so on and so forth. And the World Bank keeps track of this information. There's the link for you to see the data yourself. And what they do is they take the amount of water that comes through rainfall, so the Met information is taken, and all this information is taken, water that comes in through precipitation and so on, and they calculate the volume of that water divided by the population. So that they calculate how much water comes into Malawi per person per year or per capita. In the 1964, when the data was collected, we were at about over 4,000 cubic meters of water per capita. Now it is a little under 1,000 liters per capita. And that is because of population. So the population growth that has happened is having a strain on our water resources. The amount of water per person is reducing naturally. It should be obvious, but this is an actual graphical representation of the steepness of that impact. If I'm not mistaken, you can check at the data source. Our per capita, the cubic meters per capita indicated here is actually comparable or comparable to places like, I believe it's Morocco, or it should be Morocco, which is a desert. That is to give you what this compares to. We compare to countries that are essentially in the desert. The other water resource issue. Now, all this sounds like I'm being alarmist, like I'm trying to scare you. This is not just me saying this. Malawi is drying up. And according to this article in 2017, which was done by Suzio Chitete, also quotes the Malawi government. Modesta Kanjaye, who was the director of water resources at that time and now is now, actually said that Malawi is drying up. And there are issues with our water resources that we need to understand, that we do not understand. And this impacts both hand pumps and pipe systems, whether solar powered or not. So we need to understand our water resources, because if we understand our water resources, we can manage our systems better. So we can design our systems in light of the water resources that is situation that is there. So we need to understand our water resources before we rush putting boreholes in the ground, or before we rush installing all these systems that we say will be the magic bullet. So water resources is the third, if not fourth factor, I've lost track, that we need to consider. So it was the third factor. So this is the fourth factor. The fourth factor is adherence to standards. This picture that you're seeing is a hand pump somewhere in southern Malawi. It was installed in 2015, but it stopped working within days of the contractor leaving. When, in partnership with the University of Strathclyde and with support from the Scottish Government, we went to conduct a pumping test. Now, to those who don't know what a pumping test is, we put a submersible pump inside the borehole and we run a genset on it so that we see if the water the groundwater will stabilize. Now, when you put a submersible pump and run a genset, the water table will drop. But at some point, the expectation is that it will stabilize, meaning it will stop dropping and stabilize. And the water inside the hole will still be there. Or what we call the water column. There will still be water inside the water column for people to actually use. And we're supposed to run this test for not less than 4 hours. We ran this test for 2 minutes and 43 seconds. The pump failed. Why was this system installed? It was installed by an NGO working in this southern region district. We know the name of the NGO. They will not be named here. Why was this commissioned? Was the pumping test actually done properly? Was there someone to review and look at the data itself to see if the pumping test was done right? Was there? Was there a hydrogeologist available to actually supervise this exercise? Clearly, there wasn't. And subsequent to this, there's another problem. Makosana, my reports that we produce, Ndabodza. The drilling reports that exist, a number of them are fake. What you are seeing is a profile of the borehole, so the actual hole itself. The one on the left is the driller's report of what the hole looked like and the depth, and also the reality when Strathclyde and my team from BASEflow went into the field to actually check if that was true. What we found out, if you see the lines that are there on what we're calling slotted casing, this is the section of the casing where the water comes in when you're pumping. What we found out was that where the slotted casings were not where the driller said. But also the depth of the borehole, they said it was 35 meters, we found 29. So a difference of 6 meters. My team in BASEflow has done a lot of this. We have found differences of 10 meters, 15 meters, where the report says one thing and the results say a different one. That is if you're lucky to get the drilling reports, because some of them don't exist, or the drillers do not want to share them. And I'm speaking from practical experience. This raises an issue of accountability. Are we holding people accountable? The NGO that drilled that hand pump, the driller that drilled that hand pump, the donor that paid for that hand pump should be held accountable, but they're not. And the standards that we have in this country, we are not following them. Now, those of you who want to have these solar-powered submersible pumps, reticulated systems, according to some people who've done it professionally, you need to do a pumping test of usually between 2 to 3 weeks. But what client is willing to pay for that? Some of the challenges here where you're supposed to pump even for 4 hours, some clients will not pay for that. They'll say, just to 1 hour, that's enough. And we comply, yet we know the standards. So if we are breaking standards as simple as 4 hours, what more a pumping test of a deep borehole with a submersible pump that's supposed to run for 2 to 3 weeks? I've seen boreholes, for example, in Scotland. I've had the privilege of going to Scotland. I've seen boreholes that go kilometers into the earth and they have pumping tests that run for 2 to 3 months. Can we do that? Is our clients willing to pay for that? So the issue of standards is a very important issue that we need to deal with, and how we enforce those standards and hold people accountable when they don't follow those standards. The last factor, I want to share a story. This factor is a very contentious one. In my work, I've worked for different clients. Sometimes the funder wants to support an installation of a borehole, and they're well-meaning, and the beneficiary is a community who are being represented by a member of parliament. And sometimes, and this has happened, there's one occasion where it did happen, where when we did drill with the driller, pumping test was done with colleagues from other funders, and we found that the location could not sustain 0.25, which is the design yield I talked about earlier. But yet, surprisingly, the member of parliament was pushing that the location should be installed anyway. Yet it failed. We suggested we go to different locations. We did that, and the result was the same. That village, the yields there were too low for proper yield of water. But the member of parliament pressured, and that location was installed. I will not mention who that member of parliament was, but this is a very common story where politicians interfere in issues that are supposed to be dealt with by technical people. I have friends who are district water officers who cannot do their job because politicians, members of parliament, ministers interfere with the technical aspects of their work. I have friends, engineers in water boards at district level who are transferred between districts because they follow their job. They use data to make their decisions. So the politicians are making the decisions, not the technocrats and the science behind that. It is ludicrous, ridiculous even, that parliamentarians can have a meeting and say, we have money for 20 boreholes, we have 5 constituencies, then that is share equally 4-4-4. That is ludicrous. It needs to be based on data, evidence. Why are you putting 4-4? Maybe you might end up oversupplying one area and undersupplying another. And this is very common, especially with members of parliament who are in power, where certain locations have more than they need and others have nothing. So I want to share this quote, which was shared, I believe, by Peter Mwanza at the February 2017 Shire River Basin Conference. At that conference, he made this quote: "The science behind understanding water resources is important, but it's the politics of the time that determines the future." This is very unfortunate because it is the science that must inform the politics, not the politics inform the science. And I want to be clear here. Members of parliament are important. They have a role to play, but they have to respect that engineers, hydrogeologists, hydrologists, water officers at district level, all these people also have a role to play, and they must respect that role. Because if they don't, and most of these people are afraid to speak up, because they are afraid that their jobs will be transferred, they'll be sacked. One particular friend of mine was transferred and sat to Pui for several months because he did his job. So the politics should not lead the science. The science must lead the politics, and this affects whatever technology you bring in. So, in closing, what are my key points from this presentation? Number one, there is no magic bullet. This discussion should not be about, oh, we should get rid of the hand pump and bring in these sophisticated technologies. This is not the issue. Because you can use whatever technology you want, as long as it is standardized and approved by the government and it is workable for that context. The real issue we should be talking about as a country, as engineers, as water practitioners, is this issue of focusing on sustaining the technology, whatever the technology may be. And it is important for our parliamentarians, our leaders at village level, as well as national level, to understand this. It's about sustaining the technology. We are in the time of the Sustainable Development Goals. During the Millennium Development Goals, drilling worked, but it didn't work for the long term. So the Sustainable Development Goals are forcing us to think about sustainability. And what are the things we need to do? We need to innovate on operation and maintenance systems, as I talked about. Personally, I think rural populations should not maintain their systems. You're better off having a regional water board manage, for example, all the pipe systems, and they delegate that to someone who is trained who understands how to manage that system. And the tariff should at least be a little bit above full cost recovery, so that there's an incentive to manage these systems. With hand pumps, same thing. The community should focus on fundraising, and you get a mechanic who has been trained and is known by the district to just manage a network or a catchment of these hand pumps. That's what I would suggest we do. Rural communities should not maintain these systems. In the same way, we in urban areas don't have to maintain them. So that's what I would suggest in terms of innovating operation and maintenance systems in rural Malawi. Secondly, improve investment transparency for better coordination, especially among NGOs. There have to be penalties when NGOs don't reveal their information. And just to be clear, I run an NGO and I try to be as transparent as I possibly can. But there have to be penalties, because if others are not being transparent, why should I? There's no incentive for me to do that. And this is to NGO board as well as the government of Malawi. If organizations like mine, and there are others who are also transparent, but if the vast majority are not, What's the incentive for us to continue doing so? So we need to improve of investment transparency for improved coordination. Also, we need to intensify integrated water resources management. And this is very key to engineers here. Like I said, I'm an engineer. We need to bring in other capacities. Irrigation engineers, you need to bring in the capacities of hydrogeologists, hydrologists, structural engineers, civil engineers, so that we complement each other and you get insight from different perspectives. Likewise, civil engineers, bring in irrigation engineers, hydrogeologists, geologists, all these capacities, and even social people, by the way. We should not ignore social scientists, so that it is a well-rounded and interdisciplinary intervention, so that all angles are covered. So this is part of integrated water resources management. So we need to bring in a more interdisciplinary approach, and we also need to understand the water resources first before we jump in and start drilling or installing systems. And this is where we need to understand the water demand balance. My team has just been trained by Dr. Geoffrey Javula, who's an expert in these things, where we need to understand how much money water is coming in against how much water is being taken out through boreholes and other things, so that we see, is there a deficit of water in terms of the water balance or a surplus? So we need to have that understanding and build and design our interventions based on that understanding. So we need to intensify integrated water resources management. And engineers, water practitioners, we've been talking about this for too long. We need to implement. I'm hoping that since the Department of Water has moved from agriculture to forestry and natural resources, those discussions could start happening. Also, we need to enforce standards and accountability mechanisms. We have standards, people. Let's enforce them, and those who don't adhere to those standards must be held accountable, including NGOs and members of parliament, using the legal frameworks we have to hold these people accountable, and they should be penalized accordingly. And lastly, as I mentioned, the science must drive policy, not the policy drive science. Politicians, members of parliament who are listening, and also leaders like His Majesty, my experts, if Filipo, we can advise you. Reach out to us. Don't, of course, not me. I'm not saying you shouldn't come. You can come to me, but there are certain things I know and there are certain things I don't know. So reach out to the experts who understand hydrogeology, hydrology, civil engineering, drilling. They are experts for all these things. There's no jack of all trades. They're masters of some. So you need to reach out to these people to understand the science. And I think to those parliamentarians, this is a policy issue that you need to think about for future generations. I'll end with a quote by the CEO of the National Water Resources Authority, Mr. Oswald Mamsamali, who said to me, "We dream in color, but we implement in black and white." In this time where we're talking about mindset change in Malawi, after the Vice President's public lecture about mindset change, it is fine, it is good. We can talk about mindset change. We can talk about thinking big. But before we think big, we have to think. Before we dream in color, we have to understand, what does dreaming in color mean? We are in the time of the SDGs now, not the MGDs where we're just drilling. And the SDGs are forcing us to think about sustainability. And that means we need to start asking very hard questions. I'm a civil engineer. The reason why I went to do an MBA was because I wanted to understand economics, finance, project management, leadership, human resource management, and all of those elements. Because the problems of the future are not technical. The problems of the future have to do with bringing together all these dimensions in a kind of nexus fashion and dealing with them jointly. Not health on its own, energy on its own, water on its own, or the different capacities, water engineers, irrigation, hydrogeologists. No, the problems of the future require that we come out of our silos and work together to address sustainability. There's no magic bullet. We have to find a way of collaborating together better. So we can dream in color, but we have been implementing in black and white. We are in the time of the SDGs, but we still have MGD thinking. And it is up to us, like I said, this is a presentation for the Malawi Institute of Engineers, but I know many other people will be listening, but I'm speaking to the Malawi engineers. This is a conversation we must drive as engineers. If we do not grapple with these challenges of sustainability as soon as possible, no one will. That is our responsibility as engineers. I was talking to one of the officials of the Malawi Institute of Engineers, Engineer Fidele Amoyo, and I talked about, I think it's time engineers had a kind of oath, an engineer's oath. So our oath is that we have to ensure that the systems we put in place are sustainable. On that note, thank you very much, and that's the end of my presentation. You are free to send questions directly to me. My email address is Muthi, M-U-T-H-I, at BASEflow, B-A-S-E-F-L-O-W, M-W. So that's baseflowmw.com, Muthi at baseflowmw, one word, small letters, .com. But also, this will be on YouTube, it will be on WhatsApp, and also on the engineers' Facebook page. But if it's on YouTube, you can post your questions just below, and I will get back to you accordingly, or you can just email to get information. Thank you very much for your attention, and let's change Malawi for the better. Thank you.